I can't recall the exact moment I realized something wasn't right. It began as any other night would. About 2 hours outside of the city, I was on my way back from my cousin's house, a tiny farmhouse. Even though it was almost midnight, I was alert despite my fatigue. I had traveled that path 100 times. However, the road ahead abruptly split in two this evening as I passed an old, rusted gas station. The typical highway was to the left, but a narrow road that I had never seen before was to the right. No indications. Not a light. Trees swallowed the dirt path. My GPS made a mistake, recalculated, and then nothing. The screen turned dark. My headlights flickered for no apparent reason. At that moment, I noticed a wooden sign by the side of the enigmatic road, nearly obscured by vines. It said, Old Mill Road, 3 miles to Barrow's End. I have no idea why I turned. I am unable to explain it. However, I sensed it as soon as my wheels touched that road. It was not intended for me to be present. The first few minutes were unsettling, but doable. The fog ahead was illuminated by my high beams, and the trees grew closer and closer at every turn. There were no insects, no wind, and not even the faint rumble of my own engine seemed real. It was completely quiet. There was only an odd silence, as if everyone was holding their breath. In an attempt to release the mounting tension, I rolled down the window. I became aware of the odor at that point. Moist ground. Wood that has burned. And something else, something metallic and sharp, like blood or rusted iron. To block it out, I switched on the radio, but all I heard was static. Then, almost inaudibly, a voice said through the distortion, "You came back." With my heart pounding, I jerked the knob and turned the device off. However, I hadn't mentioned that I had visited there previously. Barrow's End was completely unknown to me. I thought about turning around for the first time at that moment. I ought to have. I should have, really. After a few minutes, the road started to twist strangely. The turns weren't there before, I promise. I felt as though I was driving underwater because my steering was sluggish. I could hardly see past the hood as the fog grew thicker. Then something sprinted across the street. Quick, pale, and human-like. With my heart in my throat, I applied the brakes hard. I looked for movement in the darkness as the car screeched to a stop. Nothing. Nothing but quiet. The road changed when I gradually resumed driving. As though it hadn't been used in decades, the pavement was now uneven and cracked. Something in the distance caught my headlights. A barefooted woman standing in the middle of the lane. Her hair was matted to her face, and her dress was soaked. She remained motionless. I lowered the window a little, slowed down, and exclaimed, "Hey, do you require assistance?" No answer. Then she suddenly raised her head. She had white eyes. No students. No irises. Simply put, empty. Without checking the rearview mirror, I pressed the gas and sped past her. The road never ended, even though I drove for what seemed like hours. Not a town. No indications. Only that unnatural fog and the endless forest. My phone had died. At 12:06 a.m., the dashboard clock had stopped. No matter how long I drove, nothing changed. Identical curves. The trees are the same. It felt as though you were stuck in a loop. At that moment, I noticed something that made me feel extremely cold. The same wooden sign from earlier, this time in front of me. 3 miles to Barrow's End is Old Mill Road. I had come full circle. My heart fell. In the hopes that a reset, a breath of fresh air, might shatter the illusion, I parked the car on the shoulder and got out. Outside, however, the air was worse. It was substantial, heavy, and whispery. They were everywhere, but they weren't noisy. Deep in the trees, but right next to my ears, there was one distinct voice. The voice of a child. "You shouldn't have returned," it said. After getting back into the car, I attempted to start the engine, but it died after sputtering once. Dead. No power, no lights. At that moment, I became aware that handprints were being formed by the condensation on the windshield. Tiny ones. Kid-sized, from within. In complete panic, I bounded out of the car. Around me, the fog had begun to shift. It moved as if it had a purpose, rather than merely drifting. A will. Inside it, faint but human-like shapes began to take shape. Dozens of them. They were all standing quietly, observing the trees. Breathing heavily, I retreated from the vehicle. The whispers became louder and more hostile, but the figures remained motionless. Now they were chanting words that I was unfamiliar with. I didn't care where it led, so I turned and ran back down the road. I just wanted to get out. But the road continued no matter how far I ran. It would not stop. Then I saw her once more. The same female. The same wet garment. But she was closer this time. She was grinning as well. I came to a halt. There was something impossibly wrong with that smile. It was too wide, as if her skin wasn't supposed to move in that manner. She never closed her mouth completely again. She just stood there, staring at me with those empty white eyes, that hideous smile frozen on her face. I remained silent. I was unable to. My legs moved by themselves, taking a slow step back. She didn't follow. However, I sensed that there was something behind me. Slowly, I turned and saw them once more. The people in the mist. Dozens of them. Perhaps more. They were nearer this time. Their details were now visible to me. Some were small, some tall, and all of them were motionless. Their bodies were rigid like mannequins, and their faces were expressionless. However, as soon as I turned my head away from the woman, they started to move. Not going for a walk. Sliding. Effortless. Quiet. Accelerating unnaturally to close the gap. I ran into the woods. I didn't care that the branches were tearing at my face and arms. I simply ran. Further into the forest, farther from the road, farther from them. However, the farther I traveled, the stranger everything seemed. Trees grew in strange ways, some upside down, some sideways. The sky was starless. No moon. There was nothing but blackness above me, as if someone had covered the sky with ink. The sound that had plagued me ever since the radio first flickered on came back to me. A murmur. My own words, uttering my own name. Again and again, from all sides. I screamed for it to stop as I whirled around, confused. However, the voices continued to rise in volume. A few chuckled. A few people sobbed. Then only one of them spoke clearly. "You never existed." I fell to my knees. I was losing my mind. I attempted to reconstruct the timetable, including the roads I had traveled and the time I had left the house. But like smoke, the memories were slipping out of my grasp. I was no longer sure how long I had been there. Minutes? Hours? Days? I noticed blood on my hands, 3 scratches, but they weren't painful. I felt numb. I noticed a glimmer of light coming through the trees at that moment. A cabin. Old and small. In the window, a lone lantern flickered. It appeared to be salvation. I didn't care if it was a trap. I just ran toward it. The forest was no match for anything. I screamed for assistance as I smashed my fists against the door. By itself, the door creaked open. It was dark inside. Dusty. Quiet. However, the door slammed behind me as soon as I entered. The wall was covered in faded pictures. White and black. They all depict various people standing on the same road, including women, men, and children. Old Mill Road. A few appeared perplexed. Others appeared frightened. However, They all shared the same white eyes. A dusty old book was resting on a table in the middle of the cabin. I slowly opened it. There were names inside. Names, pages, and pages. Some were freshly written, some crossed out. And there it was, on the final page. My name, in flawless handwriting. The words claimed by the hollow appeared just beneath it. With my heart racing, I retreated. The murmurs were back, louder than before. The lights wavered. Like they had free will, shadows moved stealthily along the walls. The door wouldn't open even though I ran for it. The windows wouldn't shatter. Inside, I was sealed. Then I noticed the girl. Now that she was inside, she stood in the room's corner with her head cocked to the side as if she were observing me. The grin had vanished. She had a blank expression. She raised one hand slowly and gestured to the ground behind me. When I turned, I noticed a trapdoor that I had never seen before. I opened it mindlessly. A ladder went down into the dark, and I heard them, the footsteps, from below. The buzzing, the voices. Everyone is waiting. I turned to face the girl again. She gave one nod, then disappeared. I ought to have remained. I ought to have fought. However, I felt a pull in the direction of the darkness. I began to descend. As I ascended farther into the darkness, the ladder creaked under my weight. Every step I took reverberated as though I were going down into a cavernous room carved out of the ground. Despite the lack of light, I managed to see. The faint shapes of the wooden walls surrounding me pulsed a little, as if they were breathing. With every step, the air became thicker and colder. The walls felt damp, covered in something like moss or rot, and my breath came out in visible puffs. Now that the whispers I had heard on the road were back, they weren't whispers down here. Voices were heard, chanting, low, unified, repeating something I didn't understand. When I got to the bottom of the ladder, I entered a small, ancient stone hallway. Names were inscribed on the walls. Dozens. Hundreds. Many of them were on dates. Others only had the name. And I felt like I was being watched everywhere. I traced the chilly wall with my hand as I walked slowly down the hallway. I began to recognize the names at that point. First, Brandon Ellis, a high school acquaintance. In 2009, he disappeared while hiking. Then another, a woman I used to work with who vanished while traveling to see relatives years ago. These weren't merely names. I knew them. Those who had vanished without a trace. The corridor led to a chamber, a big round space with sickly green flames from torches. A mirror stood in the middle. Elaborate. Old. I walked slowly up to it, and I almost passed out from what I saw. It wasn't me who was reflected. It was me, but in a different way. Pale. Empty. My eyes are white. And the figures were in the mirror's reflection behind me, circling me in a circle. However, the room was deserted when I turned. Like water, the mirror started to ripple. I took a step back, but it drew me closer. Mentally, not physically. I noticed flashes. Not my memories. Individuals entering Old Mill Road, all by themselves, at night. A few attempted to turn around. Others disregarded the cautions. However, they all came to this place. They all made claims. One more thing was visible in the mirror. My car. Just past the gas station, it collided with a tree. Smoke is rising inside my body. Not moving. My temple was dripping blood. Over me, a rescue crew was calling my name in an attempt to wake me. However, I remained motionless. I was unable to since I was no longer there. I was present. Here. In the memory of this road, inside its jail. I screamed and dropped to my knees in front of the mirror. I pleaded. I sobbed. However, no one was around to listen. The torches flickered wildly as the room started to tremble. The girl reappeared from the darkness. She looked different this time, though. Older. Her eyes were filled with grief instead of being blank. "Now you understand," she whispered as she knelt next to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Everyone is remembered on the road." Then everything turned dark. I was standing in the center of Old Mill Road when I woke up. No fog, not a light. The trees are being pierced by morning sunlight. The chirping of birds. I had lost my car. The air was clean, and the trees were motionless. However, I knew deep down that I hadn't gotten away. I continued walking until I came to the main road. I signaled a truck. The driver dialed for assistance. An ambulance arrived. They located my wreck. They also located me. Still within. Still not conscious. Connected to machines. Low brain activity. Not responding. I was unconscious. 6 months have passed since then. I remain in the hospital. At least my body. But me, I remain here. Along that road. Observing others make poor decisions. Listening to their cries as they plead for return. Furthermore, there is nothing I can do. Because you can't get off the road once you see it and it takes you. Barrow's End is not accessible by car. You join it. Forever.